Every one of our cities has places in it, places that most of us don't want to go. Most of us don't want to be found there at night. Places that are dark, that are gripped by violence and poverty and drugs and gangs. You know, it's really important when God gets a hold of somebody in the upper reaches of a city, a board chairman of a hospital or a business leader or a sheriff or a chief of police. But you know what? It's equally important when God gets a hold of somebody, a unique person who's able to go into those dark places of the city and rescue people and begin to establish islands of health and sanity in the insanity of the inner city. Today we're talking with one of the people in Fresno who is connecting kids from the most difficult streets of our community to the mainstream, rescuing them from gangs. His name is Brian King. He's CEO of Fresno Street Saints, and he's here with us to talk to us about some of the realities in his life and what caused him to be useful to God in rescuing young people from the grips of gangs. This is our city, and I'm H. Spees.
It belongs to you, it belongs to me. This is our city.
Well, brother, it's good to have you here.
Good to be here, Ace.
And, Fresno Street Saints is an organization, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but our show is so much about relationships, and you and I have been knowing each other for about 15 years.
Yeah, 15 years. Yeah, good 15 years, bro.
Good 15 years.
Great 15 years.
You came from?
Chicago,
Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And you were a part of a very sophisticated organization there. What was the name of it?
The Gangster Disciples.
Largest gang in America.
Yeah, about 100,000 members in Chicago.
100,000 members.
Mm-hmm.
And when you left that gang, you were at that point the assistant to the number 2 guy in Gangster Disciples.
Yeah, I used to assist one of the number 2 guys in the organization.
So one of the things that we do on this show is to kind of get inside of where a person is at, and I've got the great benefit of having heard your story from your own lips and mouth over the years. But as I think about that, Brian, I think about how you were trapped in a neighborhood between 2 huge housing projects.
Yeah, we had Robert Taylor's Stateway Gardens on the west of us, the east of us, and Ida B. Wells on the west of us.
Now describe that neighborhood in your growing up years.
It was 100% African American, gang affiliated, gang infested, drug infested, high unemployment rate.
When you say high unemployment rate, 6, 10%?
No, I think that I think it might have been in the projects. The projects were 16 stories high, 12 across, and I think that one building would probably be like 97% unemployment.
16 stories high,
Yeah.
12 units across.
Yeah.
And that's a little city.
Yeah, in itself, yeah. Just one building, but they stretched as far as all the way down State Street. If you're familiar with Chicago, it stretched from like 18th and State on back down to 55th and State.
And guys like me were coming into that neighborhood all the time, just walking down on the way to work, right?
Yeah, he was a police or a judge or something, maybe. Yeah, no way, H. No way.
You found yourself in that setting, and as you talked about your own motivation to get into gangs, it really had to do with your own family.
Yeah, well, you know, coming from that type of community, there was always trouble going back and forth to school. You had to fight to go to school. You had to fight to go to the playground. You had to fight to go anywhere you went. And so the house was supposed to be a safe haven, but because of issues in my own home with my dad, alcoholic, drinking, and figured that he was real abusive with my mother. And so I knew I couldn't continue to let him be abusive to my mother, so if help wasn't finna come from the inside, I had to get it from somewhere else. And so when I was 8, I joined the Gangster Disciples.
8 years old, joined the Gangster Disciples, and that was your backup for your dad who was beating up your mom.
Dad and anything else.
Wow. So 8 years old, you become, I think I read in your testimony that you were a baby disciple.
Yeah, I was a baby disciple.
Well, how did your life change as you began to get involved in the gangs from about 8, say, to 11 years old?
Oh, well, by the time I was 11, I was holding drugs for some of the older guys in the community. I was able to get them in and out of the drug house and back to the playground and under the police detection.
So they would use little kids to transport,
Yeah, exactly.
so they wouldn't get caught with drugs on them.
Exactly, and then if they needed, however they needed, well, how many they needed, they would throw us up some fingers and send the guys or the women over there to us, and we knew how many to give them, and we'll serve them, and they go head on.
How many bags?
Yeah.
And for that, you were paid
Yeah, I was making them $100 a day.
$100 a day as an 11-year-old.
Yeah, I wish I can go back to that.
Yeah. There's a lot of folks that would love to.
Yeah.
But that's part of the deal, isn't it? The attractiveness of gangs has to do with just the incredible amount of money that's involved.
Oh yeah, it's lucrative. I mean, a lot of gangs figure that if society is not going to let them in, they're going to create their own society. And their own society has bottom lines like any other business, how much money can be made. But the rules are just different.
I think that's probably one of the things that I've learned most from you as you have worked in a ministry to rescue kids from gangs, is that as you've shared with me the inner workings of gang life in the most sophisticated gang in America, in Chicago, one of the most sophisticated cities, it really wasn't just all chaos, it was controlled chaos. There was a book that you talked to me about.
Yeah, there were laws and policies that we needed to be adhered to. And if you got outside of those guidelines, you would be dealt with in whatever manner that you got outside of the guidelines in.
So there were strict laws and rules and policies that governed the gang.
Yeah, exactly.
And you ended up being one of the guys that was an enforcer.
Well, I wasn't an enforcer. I held a couple of key positions in the whole organization, in a couple of key areas in our cities, and had to make sure that a lot of things were taken care of.
100,000 gang members, and you ended up being the assistant to the #2 guy. That's a big deal. That's sort of like graduate school in management.
Well, in a way, you know, the higher you get up, the more is expected out of you, you know, and then you really come to find out that what you believed in for a long time was really not. It was really kind of a thing where people were being exploited and used because of their love for this organization.
At one point, you began to use some of the stuff that was in those bags that you were transporting, and that led to a downward spiral for you.
Oh yeah, by the time I was 16 years old, I was a full-blown heroin addict. Yeah, by the time I was 19, I was over on Skid Row in the west side of Chicago, just going from detox to detox, from shelter to shelter, home to home, you know, wherever I could lay my head at. You know, I remember one day smoking a cigarette with a guy. It was about 35 of us in the abandoned building, and I was sharing a cigarette with a guy, and we both went to sleep. I woke up the next morning, he was dead.
Wow.
An older guy.
Abandoned building, a bunch of you guys there, you wake up and you're sitting next to a corpse.
Yeah.
What happened in you, inside of you, when you woke up to that?
And it was another day. I had to get out of there. You know, I was going to see what I can do for that day to make sure that I survived another day.
And at that point, the gangs wouldn't have anything to do with you because you were such a deep addict, you were no longer useful to them.
Yeah, gangs had laws and policies, and drugs was one of them that you couldn't take of any controlled substance.
You had a part of your journey out was a visit to a chapel. You got desperate, you went into a detox, and you found your way into a chapel. What happened there?
I don't know, H. I went in and I knew that I didn't want to be that way. I can remember when I was 11 making all this money, and everything I seemed to touch seemed to turn to gold, and I wanted to get back to that status. And so